Good afternoon, and thank you for having me come and give an update. Today I want to talk pretty briefly about some of the information we've been gaining over the last couple months on Lake Oahe and Lake Sharpe. I want to iterate that this is very new information. It's an ongoing process. As such, we'll be giving updates throughout the summer, this fall, probably for the next year or two even, with regards to the flood on Missouri River fisheries. I do want to point out that we've been trying to make transparency of our information a high priority, and so we started this winter with talks, updates throughout the state. We went and gave updates at Rapid City, here in Pierre, Sioux Falls, in Aberdeen. We put together a informational packet, tear sheet packet, that we distributed along different bait shops and hotels all up and down Lake Oahe. Which ended up being very popular. We had a lot of people request for additional packets, the tear sheets for people. People were using them quite a bit and taking those informational sheets. We also did a number of TV and newspaper interviews from PBS to Kellerland, a lot of the different newspapers and stuff. Again, trying to get the word out and relaying what we know to the public and to the anglers. A couple weeks ago, we had what we call some coffee talk sessions, which is where the first one we had some local Oahe guides come in. We had members of South Dakota Walleye Unlimited. We also had some anglers, then a couple members of the Game Fish and Parks, and it was pretty much just a sit down, and we talked with these people, a very informal conversation type dialogue. We really wanted to hear what was being said, and the word, essentially what the word on the street was, what everybody was thinking and hearing. Get their thoughts, and we just talked quite a bit, and I think that was a very productive interaction between us and, like I said, the guides and the anglers. After that, we had another coffee talk session that was with some members of the Department of Tourism, Great Lakes Association, and some local lodge owners and people like that, some of more the tourism side of stuff. And again, another very productive interaction, I think. And so I just want to reiterate that these updates that we have are going to be ongoing for the next year, and I think it's really important to relay what we know to the public, to the anglers, and just be, like I said, as transparent as possible. So today, again, in just a really quick update, I only have probably 8 or 10 slides showing some of the results, preliminary results of some of our larval trawling studies, and also some of our creel results. So, I kind of split it up in Lake Sharpe, and Lake Sharpe I'll be very quick, very brief on. Lake Sharpe this spring, we had a lot of reports of skinny fish, and when we went out and looked at some of the fish on Lake Sharpe, they were in fact very skinny. We think we know what caused this. Last year we had very high flows through Lake Oahe, through Lake Sharpe. And when this happens, it actually decreased the water temperature in Lake Sharpe. And so we did not have a successful spawn of gizzard shad last year. It just never warmed up. Usually they spawn low 70s, high 60s, and that water just stayed cold all summer. And so last summer, it wasn't a problem with those gizzard shad out in there because a lot of the sport fish could utilize the rainbow smelt that were coming through the dam. But as soon as the faucet was turned off and the smelt stopped coming through the dam, those fish had very little to eat in Lake Sharpe. But the good thing is that this year we've had a very good hatch so far. These are gizzard shad that were caught from Hippo Lake, again on June 26th. And you can see here at least 5 different cohorts of spawning that are going on. So this is probably one of the first spawnings that's happened in Hippo Lake. This is probably 3 or 4 week old gizzard shad, and then the smallest one down there is probably only about a week or 10 days old. And the good thing about gizzard shad is that they're protracted spawners, so they'll spawn once in a really big spawn, but then they keep spawning throughout the summer, as long as the water temperatures stay optimal. So they'll keep spawning until the water gets too warm. So we're seeing this, very strong gizzard shad hatch in Lake Sharpe right now. It'll only be a matter of time before those fish, grow large enough to be utilized by the sport fish, being incorporated into the diets, and then you'll see, the growth start increasing. So as far as Lake Sharpe goes, you know, we should start to see the normal Lake Sharpe here pretty soon. When you start looking at some of our creel numbers, again, we only have up through June this year, obviously. And so what we're doing is comparing some of the creel statistics from the April through June period of all the previous years. So for this graph, we have the angling pressure, so the total amount of angling hours on Lake Sharpe for that April through June period, and then comparing it across the last 20 years. And you can see that, you know, we've actually had pretty average angling pressure on Lake Sharpe so far this year. But when you start looking at harvest, and this is, again, the harvest over the last few years for that April to June period, we've had record harvest. The catch rates on Lake Sharpe have been really good this year. So even with the normal pressure, we've had the highest harvest seen for the April through June period on Lake Sharpe. Now with those gizzard shad coming into the system, you know, pretty soon the walleye will have a natural food source, and I imagine it's going to get a little bit tougher to catch fish here coming up. I wanted to briefly touch on salmon because that was kind of an oddball this year. Starting this spring and early summer, we are having a lot of reports of people catching a lot of salmon. And from last year, we saw all of these fish, or many salmon moving through the system. Nebraska broke their state record 3 times last year. We were catching a lot of salmon from below the dams to do our spawning effort. And so, you know, we weren't very optimistic about the salmon fishing this year. But it kind of came back and is kind of an oddball. We started talking to some anglers, and our creel guys were out there talking to people, and fishing's actually been pretty good. When the fish are biting, people are having really good days catching a lot of fish. So we went and ran some of the creel numbers, and our preliminary estimate, again, for that April through June period is that we've harvested over 1,000 fish already, which puts us at above average for the last 10 or 15 years. Which is, you know, odd when we think about it and the number of fish that are in there. So we started scratching our heads a little bit and went back and looked at the tag ratios and where these fish were coming from. And of the Oahe caught salmon, 90 to 95% of them were actually North Dakota salmon. And so we gained, you know, from what we can tell, we actually gained quite a few of North Dakota salmon. Then when you go down and look at the Sharpe caught salmon, you know, we've only had seven fish brought back to us that were caught in Lake Sharpe, and 6 of those were from South Dakota. So if you think about it, you know, North Dakota really gave us their salmon, and then the salmon that we stocked in Oahe pretty much moved downstream. But on the, you know, on the good side, the salmon fishing's been really good. Now a little bit on the prey fish. You know, this is the hot topic, the prey fish and walleye and Lake Oahe. One thing that I want to say, and you know, we talked about this we hear about it from anglers. We heard about it in our coffee talk time with the guides. People have been seeing these clouds of baitfish on Lake Oahe. And we actually ran the first hydroacoustic transect last night, and I talked to Chris Edwards, our wildlife biologist who's in charge of the hydroacoustic estimates, and he was saying that these clouds of prey fish actually look like or resemble the clouds of prey fish they had back in the 2000s when we had a Goodyear class of lake herring that came through. We won't know for sure until later this July, until we get out and do some of the sampling that we'll be able to capture those fish. But it's likely that we had a really good year of lake herring reproduction. Another thing I want to mention is that gizzard shad. We stocked 1,800 gizzard shad this year, adult gizzard shad, in an attempt to bolster prey resources in some localized areas. And to date, we've caught larval shad, the very, very young shad, at 6 of the 7 sites that we stocked. Currently, they're in low abundance, and this is just one of the samples from one of those sites. That's actually from Whitlock's. Currently in relatively low abundance, but again, the great thing about gizzard shad is that they're a protracted spawner. They'll keep spawning throughout this summer. So that's also a good thing. And then also, we've also been catching a good number of other prey species caught in our larval trawl, white bass, and actually some yellow perch as well. So that's our, what we know so far of prey fish. We'll know more, obviously, once we finish our hydroacoustics. Like I said, we just started. We'll finish the rest of the prey fish work throughout July to the beginning of August, and at that time we'll have, a better idea of exactly what's out there. This is just some preliminary data. Another big thing that we're going to do at the end of July, beginning of August, is actually do some walleye diet studies to actually see what they're eating out there too, which is important. So the next big thing I wanted to show was our creel effort from April through June. And believe it or not, this is not the highest year we've seen as far as angling pressure since the early 1990s. It's currently the third highest, with 97 and 98 actually having a higher angling pressure than this year so far. But the one big difference between now and back in 97 and 98 is our catch rates. And this year we have by far the highest catch rate record, almost doubling that of the previous record, which was set last year. And again, dramatically higher than the catch rates back in the late 1990s and early 2000s. So when you have very high pressure and record catch rates, you end up with harvest that is, again, record setting. This is, again, just for the April through June harvest, and we're already at about 400,000 walleye out of Lake Oahe. And what's crucial to look at here is to compare this to the 2001 year, when we actually had a 14 fish limit on Lake Oahe, and we even surpassed that year already. So a very, very high harvest. Again, it goes back, very high pressure, very good fishing, and we have very high harvest this year. So, just as an outlook or a summary, Lake Sharpe, we're having a successful gizzard shad hatch. That should take care of those fish. Here in the next couple months, they should start growing, start feeding on this gizzard shad, and they should be in good shape. Lake Oahe, we've had April through June is the highest harvest we've had to date, the highest catch rates we've had to date, and the third highest pressure we've had to date. Prey fish status, as it is right now, a little unknown. Again, talking to Chris, he thinks a lot of those fish were lake herring. We might have had a really good lake herring hatch. He is seeing some rainbow smelt down there, but again, we won't know numbers until the rest of the sampling comes in. And then we're also seeing, other fish caught in the trawls and everything. So that's all I had. I would love to entertain any questions, specific questions that you guys might have.
Mark, I think the meetings that we had, but I think those were, they were resourceful and an opportunity to talk directly to those folks. And it's kind of interesting it opened up some communication in terms now of the guides and the other anglers that are here tournament fishing now, of course, are starting to see the increase in the bait because of those young of the year that are hatched out, and maybe it's lake herring, maybe it's just a combination of some of the other fish too. But the interesting thing is those fish that we're now catching are starting to cough up those critters at the boat site, which somehow gives the anglers relief.
Oh yeah,
that they're finally seeing some bait in there. So I just want to point that was kind of something that I talked to several of them over this past weekend. But the issue that now seems to be a little bit on everybody's mind is the overall smallness of the fish in the upper end of the reservoir and the nursery end of the reservoir, and the inability to catch much of anything over 12 or 13 inches up there. And of course the anecdotal issue is, well, most of those big fish either got caught out up there when North Dakota was up in the upper end of Lake Oahe, when North Dakota was hammering them during the February, March, April period of time. But is there any issue in regards to the fish moving down? We've always kind of felt like the bigger fish are in the lower portion of the reservoir over the average of the last few years. Do you guys see any movement at all of big fish from the upper end of the reservoir as the water warms up down, following down? If in fact, are they looking for smelt, or if that's occurring at all? Because it seems to me like the average issues right now up in the northern end of the reservoir, all small fish, very, very, very few bigger fish?
They've actually looked at that a little bit. They did a tagging study back in the 80s, and they did another one in the late 90s, early 2000s. And what they found is that Oahe walleye actually move very little. Something like 80 to 90% of the fish only move about 20 miles within a year. There are some fish that do make larger migrations, and then there's some other studies like on Lake Erie that show walleye will follow prey fish wherever they go, but limited still. So as it is right now, it doesn't appear that walleye in Lake Oahe do these grand migrations every year. You know, they're fairly sedentary, in fact. But what is likely happening is that as the water temperatures warm up in the springtime, you'll have the bite. You know, a lot of those walleye become more active in the north, and then pretty much, you know, to the same degree as that water keeps warming up, that bite will slow down again. And then that happens, the upper Oahe actually warms up faster than lower Oahe, so it seems like, you know, the bite is actually moving downstream when in fact it's just water temperature driven. Now, is there some movement? I mean, obviously there is some movement, especially with high flows. You know, you'll see it in a lot of places where whenever you have those high flows, the walleye will kind of orient into those current and move upstream a little bit. To say whether that happened last year, you know, we don't know. As far as the northern bite, you know, it's kind of indicative of a normal year. You know, and a lot of times you'll have those bigger fish shut off before the littler fish. And with those really abundant year classes, you know, the last 3 years we've had very strong reproduction in Lake Oahe. So it could be just a fact that there's so many smaller fish out there right now that, you know, it appears that, you know, all you can catch is small fish, where, you know, you can't keep a small fish off your line long enough to catch a bigger fish.